We're back with the second half of 5+1. It's the five-time SCC champion Hikaru Nakamura taking on the 2013 World Blitz champion, making his debut, Quang Liem, in a Speed Chess Championship. And it was Liem who got the first round win. This is where we stand 2.5 to 1.5, a 1-point lead in Amman. It's absolutely essential for Liem to not let Hikaru win another game. He needs to find a way to equalize the match or stop the bleeding. But once Hikaru starts running away with it, that's going to be impossible to surmount.
Yeah, it's important to get it early because a lead is going to be truly impossible to come back from, knowing that bullet is ahead. For a match that's 99 to 1, right? The pre-match prediction. I have to say, there's been so many chances. This is exactly the match you want if you're Quang Liem. Hikaru has not played his best so far. He's shown his resourcefulness, but he's shown that side, Tanya, because he hasn't been in the best position. So Quang has had some great positions. He's had some wins that he himself has missed. So just looking at what he can fix, it's those moments near the end, realizing that Hikaru is making mistakes there that he can capitalize on.
But I'll tell you, Aman, what else Hikaru is showing us, that he's ready to play anything today. You know, we've seen the Tromposki by him. We've seen him start with d4 with bishop f4 next, switch the opening up there. And now it's the first time that he's employed the king's pawn opening against Liem in this one. We see the moves coming in, and I think this was also part of something that we expected, the bigger opening story by Hikaru, where in the 5+1, he wants to feel out his opponent to really understand their preparation, how much in form they are. And that looks like part of the match strategy. What do you make of what we have out of the opening right now?
Yeah, and Hikaru is so experienced, obviously just as a player himself, an online player, but also a Speed Chess Championship participant. He knows exactly how these matches go, what information you want out of your opponent early on in the match. And here, we're seeing a different idea. Instead of the knight e2, we're seeing knight f3, so less of the immediate f4 plan. He wants to see maybe how Quang is going to react to this. In the last position where we saw f4, it went really well. So it's not to say that Hikaru is done with that opening, never going to play it again, but he's using this 5-minute portion to just try out different positions.
And he might be looking at the f4 break. He might also at the right time be looking at expanding with d4 at the right moment, which requires little protection in the center. Right now, Quang Liem, he's opened up the path for his own queen to come to f6 and also stop the idea of knight g3.
Yeah, knight h5 is actually a really nice move against a knight on e2. The same thing can be said for knight h4 against knight e7, because the knight really wants to go to that next square on g3. And you also are supporting the f4 push yourself. So it's kind of a relationship between pieces that you see very often, and your move, queen f6, would be definitely a natural follow-up. I'm wondering about Hikaru's d4 move, and I'm kind of expecting that he wants to move this knight, maybe to h2, maybe to d2, and try to play f4 still.
It's going to be about when those central breaks do come. Meanwhile, Liem advancing on the other flank, clamping down the b-pawn a little bit. And finally, Hikaru, he doesn't skip a beat. He goes for g4, pushing the knight back, and now getting his own knight to g3. Knight f5 looking juicy as well next.
Yep, knight h7, kind of going for the exact same idea. It's much slower for Quang because of the time lost, but I think he's looking at knight f8, maybe knight g6 or knight e6, and then sinking a knight into the f4 square. So d4, Hikaru's saying, well, let me open the center. Now that I see this long plan you're going for, I'm not going to give you time to execute it.
It's a lot of knight jumps by Liem in the last couple of moves, only to trade that knight off.
Yeah. A lot of work for maybe a little gain, but it's the little things that matter. Trading off that knight means that you're taking control of some of these dark squares, and I am noticing a lot of light square pawns for Hikaru, which, what we talked about earlier, really restricts that light square bishop. But getting to an endgame, Tanya, with the queens off the board, that can actually suddenly be a good sign for Quang.
And will he trade, or does he want to trade on his own terms is the question. Does he keep the tension as is? The answer is a yes. He defends a5, freeing up the rook on a8 to come into the game. Hikaru continues, gaining more space on the left flank, and somewhere Quang Liem is setting up king g7 ideas, maybe getting the rook to the h line now, targeting the h3 tender pawn.
Yeah, and we're going to see a very solid approach here, like the pawn going to f3. This h-pawn always needs attention, whether it's going to be the king or just the rook in the future. Perhaps even the knight could find its way to the f2 square, where it just permanently defends that. And I was about to say, all of the action is about to shift to the other side of the board, Tanya, but Quang shifts there first and wants to do it maybe before knight c3, where I think all of black's ideas would basically be thwarted.
And Hikaru isn't pleased to see that. Liem going on the offense, he's playing actively, and I think you need to do that. Against a player like Hikaru, you can't just sit and expect good things to happen to you. You have these opportunities to break out. You need to do it. If pawn takes pawn, that would just mean the b file is open for the black rook to swoop over and start attacking some of Hikaru's weaknesses. If not, I think rook b8 anyway to follow up and then threatening the b2 pawn after a trade.
Yes, c5 and rook c1. I was actually wondering if maybe the other rook would make an appearance on c1, but this is a typical idea. You don't want to open the b file, so instead you want to open the c file. So your rooks are actually the ones doing something. Because the bishop is on the board, we've been talking about these light square pawns. They're great when the queens are on the board. They restrict the bishop in the mid game, but we've seen how that's transformed here. Suddenly, they're starting to become, some targets here. The bishop might come to c6, might capture next. There's going to be some weaknesses. So let's see how Hikaru navigates this position. Of course, the c-pawn is just hanging, and Hikaru eventually needs to take that to restore the material balance.
And he might just do it at this moment, but he does take a pause. So there are other things going on in his head. If he takes the c6 pawn immediately, bishop takes pawn would hit e4, not giving you enough time to capture on c5. Happily,
yeah, I think he might consider it, right? He could take that variation, take on c5, bishop takes e4, maybe knight c3 afterwards, try to take on e5. There's a lot of hanging pawns for black. They're all sort of situated on that 5th rank.
And I think these are the lines that are going through Hikaru's head right now as he does slow down. If you do take rook takes pawn, that's also very tempting because it kind of forces a decision in the center and you'll be left with a passed d pawn. Rook takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. And the black bishop remains, and I think we have that line on the board, the bishop remains restricted, knight c3, knight e4 coming in next.
Exactly. After rook to c8, you have that question, which is more important, the c or the e file? And by capturing and playing knight c3, Hikaru is saying, well, pay attention. The e file is actually what I'm after here. If we see pawn to f6, might be exactly what you were talking about. The rook can swing to a1, to e1 to keep attacking these pawns. Meanwhile, that knight is going to make an appearance on the e4 square.
And even though the bar says the endgame is level, I'm liking the activity, the piece activity and the pawn placement of white. That d5, a beautiful passer, a5 pawn weak, the knight having some good spots. And I think for now, Hikaru is probably feeling positive about his chances. Liem getting the king to the center of the board.
Yeah, instinctively, it feels like a slightly odd move to not play, pawn to f6 there, connecting everything. But his evaluation, I think, was also playing into the fact that maybe there's like rook a1 and b4 ideas. So he's giving up this pawn here, and I'm expecting pawn to f6. Yep, got to play that to defend g5, right?
I think it was the only move, right? You've got to attack the rook, get some tempo, and then eventually maybe even hit the knight and get your rook to the second rank to try to activate it. I like the move f5. It stops knight e4 before you go b4, sorry.
Yep, that's a great point, actually. Stopping knight e4 is the actual purpose of this move. And the fact that you're even threatening the g-pawn, I think that's just a side quest. Like, that's not really that important. So much so that Hikaru correctly understands it's time to push the d-pawn and make space for that knight to move.
But in that, you also give up a very key pawn of your own. Rook takes d6, and I'm trying to find the follow-up here. So knight f6 hits the bishop because there was no good way to defend it, and we get into a pure rook pawn ending. Rook e5 coming in, attacking every single pawn on the board. Well, except one.
Yeah, the issue is that the black king is nowhere near the action, and so rook d3 making the threats before white can just hop in with rook e5. I think this move was maybe underestimated by Hikaru, but if anyone's better, it feels like it's going to be Hikaru here.
This particular position, he's up 2 pawns, right? He's about to lose one, either the h3 or the b3 pawn. And And I think he'll go for some on his own right now. If anyone's pushing, it has to be white, but I don't think it's going to be enough. It just feels far too liquidated. Rook takes b3, attacks b2 pawn. So I think it was really important that Liem picks up h3 before heading to the other side.
Exactly. And this b pawn is going to disappear. These pawns, if they were connected, Tanya, it would be a different story. If the pawn on g6 was maybe back on g3, you could work those pawns one by one up the board. Here, I just think they're a little bit too disconnected that the black king is going to be able to pick the g6 pawn up.
And the b4 pawn is also a distraction that's going to be used as one to get the white rook away from the defense of the pawns on that right flank. You could start pushing b3 or come up with your own king to g7, threatening rook c6, winning the pawn on the next move. Yeah, I think this is a draw offer.
It really is. Rook b6 can be played if you don't take that pawn. At this level, this endgame is relatively trivial. I do think we'll see it played on here, but everyone knows that this should be a draw. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to try.
We'll see a draw offer. I think you're on point. We might even see this go down to a king pawn versus king stalemate at the very end. But as long as black's king is right in front of that passed pawn in these rook pawn endings, this is trivial for them. Just to place the rook at the right square on the defending side. And Hikaru just gets up and leaves, but comes right back as there's a move on the board.
Yeah, what you really didn't need to allow, in my opinion, was the white rook to b6. If black had just taken control of the 6th rank, I think that would have been a little bit smarter, because I do think that Quang Liem is making himself defend this in the most difficult way possible, but he definitely is defending it, and I certainly expect he knows how to do this. Still, there was a much easier defense that involved sort of cutting the king off. Let's see if he defends properly.
And the one you're talking about, I think it's the Filidor defense, where you make sure that the white king doesn't cross over without having to push the pawn, which causes problems of its own by some back checks. This is the short side defense, as we call it in chess, where you put the king, the defending king, on the short side and the rook on the long side to give as many checks from the 7th and the 6th rank as possible. Definitely the harder one, but Liem looking confident.
Absolutely. And it's something I would expect him to, like an area I would expect him to be confident in. He's definitely got this draw. It's just a question of whether the move orders will confuse him at all, but it's looking pretty flawless so far. All it takes is one move, though.
And very often, that's all Hikaru needs. One move. I mean, you look at him, he almost looks like he's on the hunt. He knows that there was a more elementary defense in this position, which Liem did not go for. He's going to try his best to trick him.
Yeah, we're just seeing the rook shuffling here. The defense is really that you leave the rook behind the pawn, and if the king gets checked, you go up to h7. Otherwise, you're just kind of shuffling, repeating. The one thing that Hikaru has done is get the time a little bit lower, right? It's now under 10 seconds, but Quang Liem, if he holds this draw, that will be a nice bit of confidence for him going forward.
I think he absolutely must hold this draw. If he doesn't hold this draw, we could be seeing the start of the end right here. So he needs to make sure that the defense that he started, he's able to finish it off. He gives a check. So far, so good.
Yep. Rook takes on g7 can't happen, but king h6 can.
Oh my goodness!
That's incredible.
No! Liem got forced into a lost king pawn endgame.